Let's talk human ancestors and their DNA and a little bit about the evolution of technology. So we got this dumb little mascot up here today. That's definitely not what was happening. Yeah. But it's cool. It's the thing everybody knows. So, in terms of hominid ancestors, let's start at the present and work backward. This is from a really nice site, the BradshawFoundation.com. I have no idea what their politics or motives are, but they've got a lot of information on the different hominid fossils, and so I can respect that. So this is us, Homo sapiens, and these are our nearest ancestors. Now, some of these species are somewhat in doubt. There are people who would tell you a Floresiensis is actually closer to an Erectus, and the Denisova hominins were originally only known from a tooth, but they're getting a lot more information, like from finger bones. They're kind of better known from genetics than from actual bones, like that make a structure of a face. But that's not a bad way to do it. You can make a much better phylogenetic tree from DNA data than you can from, you know, looking at stuff. Yeah. Or a much more meaningful one, I would say. Here's your Neanderthals over here. The H is silent, and so on as we go back. So let's journey back through time. So here's a Homo erectus skull. Now they're only showing you one, but there is, for example, a place, the Cimo de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones. I think it's in Spain. And it has a bunch of individuals that where they could get enough genetics to say that these are probably all part of the same species, Homo erectus or something like that, but really different skull shapes. And so, if they were just found individually, one at a time, which a lot of these were, you might say that, like something like this is different to that, and you could justify it mathematically. The problem is that there are a few of these for which we have a large amount of data, and there are a lot of these for which we have one partial skull or a skull that's not even, we have different bits that may not even be from the same skull. Yeah, that are all that we have to work from. And so there's definitely some controversy in the field of where does a particular species of hominids start and stop. But that's fine. That's what experts are for, and it's just an area of ongoing research. I would look at it that way. But once you get back before around 2.5 million years ago, Homo habilis is the handyman. This is a tool making hominid. You get a bunch of other things that look as though, like from these things, these are attachment points, I believe, for massive cheek muscles so that they could grind through like nuts and stuff with their super duper muscular jaws. And yeah, that would be more like what you would expect from a modern, something like a gorilla, for example. But these are the other branch. So these are the more robust Australopithecines, and we call ourselves the gracile, like fragile, flimsy, thin and delicate branch of the hominid family tree. But these are all things that are on the tree, and so you can look, and if you at a particular moment in time there were several of these things that looked quite different that were around, and were all in some way related to early hominids. So once you get past, so this is the genus Homo, closest to us, although some of these things you would say, boy, does that belong in genus Homo? And for all of these, actually for most of these, so we have DNA for sapiens, Denisova neanderthalensis. We have some DNA from the mitochondria for Erectus, if I'm not mistaken. And all the rest of them, I don't believe we have DNA currently, although, there may be something published before you see this video, in which case I'm really happy because, yeah, new hominid DNA is great. But once we get past like more than 1 million years old, it's unlikely that we'll recover enough DNA to be able to do anything meaningful with it. The bases break down, like we showed, and there's basically nothing readable left if we read it out the way that we normally read it. Now, there are other ways that we may be able to read this out that may actually allow us to recover some additional information, but those have to lie in the future with the development of technology. Because what I'm imagining is that all the parts of the DNA were in a long strand, and if you have a fossil that contains what's left of that strand, all the pieces will still be in the same, should be in the same relative place if it got filled in early enough and packed tight enough with mud. In which case, you may not have a recoverable string of DNA, but you may have the remnants of a G next to the remnants of a C, next to the remnants of an A, next to the remnants of a T, and you may potentially be able to start to piece some of that together with extreme amounts of computing power, just really extreme, and extreme technological advances. But I can see a way that it could work. Yeah, so I don't know. Watch some space, watch the journals. Yeah, I'm not working on this actively. Go back far enough, past about 4 million years ago, and there are no more Australopithecines. There are things like Ardipithecus, which is neat. And look at those fangs there. Oh my gosh, it's got good canines. It's not a vampire. Yeah, it's just got good canines for biting stuff. And you got Auroran, you got Sahelanthropus, and some of these things are known from very incomplete data, and still named because you need a name for the thing that you're working on. It just is like a handle that other people can pick up and use. Yeah, a thing without a name tends to just get overlooked, I think. Yeah, and so on. You can go back further and further, and you can go from hominids to just primates, and then from primates to things that are more or less just mammals or primate like mammals, and then mammals in general, and then down to little platypus looking things, and all the way back, essentially. All right. So, in terms of the evolution of technology, we can actually see this over time. So what we're looking at here are 1.5 to 1.7 to 0.85, there's your range. A million-year-old hand axes. And these things have been chiseled out probably by some sort of hominid. The ones that would have been around at the time, they can name. So these are either early Homo or late Australopithecus, but these are not Homo sapiens. This is way too early for Homo sapiens. So if we go back, who's around at there? Homo ergaster? Homo habilis certainly is the one that we assigned some of the tools to. But yeah, could have been any of these. And so we're looking at these things over time. So all right, we got a pointy end, and we got an end for you to hold on to that's maybe not as pointy. That's useful, a useful development. And they're all kind of like the modern humans have oriented them the same way so that you can make sense of that. And then if you go a little further in history, you can see this refinement. So Solutrean tools, these are going to be common across like the north part of Africa and all over Europe. And you get a lot of these. They're leaf-shaped projectile points. And so these things could have been on a spear. They could have been on something like an arrow. It's like with fossils, the hard part gets preserved, and it is rare that the wooden part or sinew part gets preserved. And so in some cases you have to imagine what that might have been. But yeah, some of the earliest technology, you go from these vaguely leaf-shaped scrapers or hand axes, yeah, which you could use to carve up meat or something, yeah, to these other ones. They're quite refined. Now, when you're looking at these points, I want you to think, how would I make a point like that? If somebody handed me a flake of flint, chert, something like that, how would you go about fashioning it? So let's say somebody has already shaved off a big, long, skinny piece that's like roughly that outline. How do you go about sharpening the edge? Because some parts of the edge are going to be thick, and you want it all to be really thin at the edge so it can like slice through whatever you're throwing or shooting it at. And so you got to make all these little sort of pressure flakes. You're going to start from inside here, and you're going to push toward the outside. And you're just going to push, and you'll push a big flake off there, and a little flake off there, and a big flake. See if you can count the flakes on some of these things, and that'll tell you the amount of very skilled work that it would take. People that make arrowheads now out of, like, stone, will tell you that it is pretty dangerous for the person making the arrowhead, and it actually takes a lot of skill to make a good one. Bad ones like that, not as much skill. Really good ones like this, yeah, because it's really easy to shatter it, to get an uneven edge as you're just pushing the rock off with a little worn down piece of bone or something. Yeah, tough stuff. Now, here's our little animated GIF. Oh, look at that. So this is showing a spear thrower, or atlatl is another name for those. There are a lot of depictions of these in pictographs. There are some remnants. There are quite a few of the throwers that have been found. And so mostly when you're looking at these projectiles, they may have been used with a spear thrower like this. And the idea is that it's basically giving you a longer arm. It is adding leverage. So instead of your arm being this long, your arm is extra long, which lets you throw it faster, harder, farther, and lets it stick into, a woollier, hidier rhino or mammoth or something like that, in a way that it would not have if you just threw it like a regular spear. So yeah, this is primitive human tech being used with other primitive human tech. You have your projectile thrower, and some of these throwers that have been recovered are tiny. They're for things that are the size of arrows. So most likely there were little spear throwers, and they were little spears long before there was anything like a bow and arrow. Because you got to figure out how to make a really good string that you can put a lot of tension on in order to make a bow, at least like we currently understand them. And yeah, that may have taken a while. Okay, and again, because this is not amateur hour, we have some points that still adhere to this type. Ours aren't quite as old as this, but we have a set of North African, Nigerian, I think, points over the sort of Neolithic, later Stone Age, somewhere between, like, I don't know, 5,000 and 10,000 years, that sort of ballpark, before present. So really old, and probably used like this. The next big technological jump. Now, this one is specific to the New World. This is not found in this form in other places. And so this is Clovis technology. And so it's named after a site in New Mexico. And these are a particular style of point. And the point is usually going to have a big flake down the center. So here's our big flake right there. Here's our big flake right there. I'm outlining it. Big flake right there. And so that makes a very narrow tapered little part that you can slot into an arrow shaft or something like that, or like a little spear, like a little split piece of stick. For the points that are more like this, that don't have that sort of little indentation, so you can slot them in. We think those were used by, you would sort of flatten off one side of the stick that's a spear, and you would set this point down, and then you would put another thing like a little bone, like a little antler bone, that would hold it in place, and you would tie that down really well. And so you're just pinching between the antler and your spear shaft, the point. And if you do that well enough, then it should stay in place. And they found, I believe, a couple that are actually constructed like that and have survived to this day from around this time. So that seems to be the way it's done as far as we can tell. But then the Clovis points here get to North America. Sometime they really start spreading around 13,500 years ago, we think. There are error bars on that of, they're pretty common by like 11,000 and starting to get modified. And maybe you could say they're as old as 15,000, something like that. But this technology spreads faster, we think, than the people themselves were spreading. So it's the idea that's spreading from one person to another who has already arrived in this place. That's the idea that people have, and it's hard to say if that's right at this point, but that seems like the best explanation. So it's a common culture and technology that spreads among people who may have been speaking different languages and had somewhat different goals, although everybody's got to eat. And yeah, bison tastes good. Yeah, so go get you some. Here is a little of the evolution. So these are the early Clovis points, just perfect like that. You can see how this is modified later on. You get these sort of shorter, fatter points. Look at the central groove on that one. Just look at that. That's amazing. Really good. A little shorter on these, really long on there. So you can slot it way down. And the other thing you'll have on Clovis points are these little prongs that are going to stick out at the back. Now those are going to work just like the barbs on the end of a modern arrow. So when it sticks in, it's going to be hard to pull it out because the little barbs are pointed, the opposite direction. As an arrow travels, it's going to be spinning like this. And so it may go in like this and then twist around. And if you're trying to pull it out, or if the animal's trying to pull it out, it'll have to basically tear a new hole. And so you get two holes from one arrow. Yeah. Which is a fun thing people have been using in war for a long time, but also probably in hunting. It's probably a hunting invention. I don't know that hunting is separate from war in human culture and existence, but yeah, we can imagine it is. And so in different places and at different times, you see this sort of evolution of the tech, the starting tech. So it looks a little more different at the end, but you can tell they're all related. And these are all really early points. All right. So now what were these guys doing with all this neat technology? Well, a lot of stuff. I'll show you some of the bad things. I don't know if bad is the right word for it, but it would feel bad if it was me and it was now, that's for sure. So what you've got here is an ancestral Puebloan. So there's a time when people would have called these Anasazi. And these are they made little forts and houses. And there's actually a number of different peoples that are living in this area that's like northern New Mexico, southern Utah, all in those canyons. And there are different periods. For a while, everybody is growing, like doing agriculture, small scale agriculture, really well. And then, and they're living out in these little huts that are kind of on their own. Then something bad happens and they feel the need to move into those. You ever seen the cliff dwellings where they're kind of like cemented into a cliff and really hard to get to? Yeah, probably they were trying to stay away from somebody else that wanted to do some bad stuff. Here's an example of some of the bad stuff. So you can see these metates, they're little grinding stones. And the neat thing about this site is that there's a lot of human remains kind of mixed in here on the grinding stones. And what they find in this place is that there's burning. So somebody came in and burned this dwelling at some point. Then there are a lot of bodies that have been brought in here from many different individuals, a minimum of 35 individuals. So they weren't all in this house. These are parts that have been brought there. And then if you look at a lot of the bone fragments that are there, they have these telltale little cuts in there, right where if you were a butcher, right where you would cut to remove the tendon from a bone, something like that. And a lot of the long bones have been broken open so that the marrow can come out. And it looks as though these are people that were eaten by other people. The way it has been reconstructed is just a massacre for reasons that are lost to us now, where at the end they ate the individuals. There are some sites from around this time where they've found coprolites, which is kind of poo, yeah. And it's full of human meat, and it is likely that this is human size. So they killed the people there, they consumed them, you could imagine ritualistically, but you're just making stuff up at this point, and then pooped them out back in their own homes, and then left, burned everything to the ground, and you see you later. Yeah. It's hard to imagine what could lead to that, although there was probably something, but good luck reconstructing it at this point. So yeah, this is a place where a lot of males and females and ages from infant to adult were processed for human meat eating, apparently. Okay, what about Mexico? Were cool things happening in Mexico? yes and no. In the dying days of the Mayan, I don't know that it's ever one empire. It's a lot of big city states. But as these city states are starting to collapse, you see evidence in several places of last desperate struggles just before everything gets burned and before nobody lives there anymore for like thousands of years. And so this is from Aguateca, and their Aguateca area. So it's spread out. You got your sort of houses for regular people and maybe a little bit of low key farmland. You got a really sharp cliff on this side. And then you got a little bit of a trench on this side. And sort of across the trench, this is the area where the temples are and where the homes with the best pottery. So those are interpreted as like the high status things. By the way, not good at anthropology. All this stuff, I'm way outside my comfort area. I'm going to do my best on this. Should have led with that. Um, but what you see here is that there's a wall that's built but not completely finished here on the sort of shallow slope side, just like thrown together out of rocks. And then the idea is that that was abandoned, but they had an inner wall that they had built up here and they fought there. And then that was abandoned. They had another inner wall here that's been thrown up, like in the middle of fields and from ripped apart houses. That didn't hold. And so the last stand is on this little island that's separated by a little channel right there, or a little slope right there. And the last thing you find, most of these houses have been cleaned out. Like they've taken all the pots from them and left. So this is people retreating in toward the center of the city. And then the last thing in the archaeological record is it looks as though everything that was in there gets burned. And in the last part, the sort of high status part, a lot of the goods from the homes are right there in the homes and everything's been burned. There was no attempt to move them out. And these are valuable things. You think they would have picked them up if they were still alive, but probably not. This is probably the fall and complete extermination of a city. Yeah. Back around, yeah, there you go, around 800 AD. But did this stuff just happen in America, gun crazy America? No, it happened in jolly old England. Not so jolly at this point. So these are very old. These are from, here you go, around a little over 2,000 years, 2000 BC. BCE would be a better way to say it. Yeah. Very early Britons. And what you've got is a pit. And the pit was like a natural fissure in the rock, but there's a whole bunch of human remains in there at one point. And the human remains have these sort of like, I don't know if you ever, yeah, if you're going to be a doctor someday, you can tell me if this is normal. I don't think it is. This is a very weird way for bone to fracture. It would fracture that way if it's hit with something hard, maybe with an edge. These are just like arrow shafts or like some kind of poleaxe sticking in the head, and you can see the cracks in the skull around that. You can see multiple ones. This person got absolutely destroyed. You can see some of these cuts on the skull bones that are still there, which were not made by the excavators. Gruesome stuff. And then you look closer and you're like, oh no, England. Why would you? Because there, right at the base, so this is a leg bone, and this is where, if you were cutting the meat off an animal, you'd cut to remove the tendons. And look at all those cuts. Somebody was taking the meat off these bones. You can see a bunch of cuts right here where somebody was getting a tasty jaw muscle off. And you can see these long bones have these crazy spiral fractures where the pressure is put on. It's like a twisting pressure from the end. Pretty rare in reality. These are things you see in very young kids mostly. But there's quite a few of these spiral fractures. And they would expose the bone marrow, the delicious, nutritious bone marrow. So yeah, this is probably, I guess, English people eating other English people. Ugh, yeah. Okay, we'll end this section here, and then we'll come back for a little something more interesting and maybe more uplifting. So see you in a minute.